Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi 1 week at a time, Masechet Bava Batra. This is our 5th class, and today we are going to be reviewing Daf 30 through 36. And we learned last week that in order to prove that a person lives or owns a piece of property, they can say that they've been there for 3 years and prove that they've been there for 3 years. And if there hasn't been a claim from the owner, then even if they can't produce a document, a bill of sale, we believe them that they own it and they can remain on the property. This is called chazaka. Chazaka in general is establishing ownership. And here it's generally, either 3 times. So here it's going to be 3 years. So now the Gemara at the bottom of Daf 29 gives us many different scenarios. So it's always going to be Reuven is going to be the owner of the property. Shimon is going to be the occupant, the person who is on the property at the time. Okay, so Reuven comes to Shimon and he says, "What are you doing in my house?" Shimon says, "What are you talking about? It's mine. I bought it from you and I've been here for 3 years." So Reuven says, "Well, I was actually living in the house the whole time. And that's why nobody saw me argue, because I actually was living in the house the whole time." So Rav Nachman says that the occupant, Shimon, needs to prove that he lived there alone for 3 years. And if he does, then he can keep the house. Rava says that Reuven, that's the claimant, the original owner, has to prove that he was living in that house. And if he proves that he was living in the house, so then he gets the house. Daf 30. But in another case, Rava actually favors the original owner, meaning here the question is, who has the burden of proof? Reuven, the original owner, or Shimon, the person who's living there now? So the Gemara brings another case where these positions were flipped, where Rava favors the original owner and Rav Nachman favors the buyer, and this seems to be a contradiction. So the Gemara says, no, those are 2 different cases. In the second case, when we're dealing with an actual sale, so then the original owner is still in possession of the property and the buyer wants to take it. And then the role is actually reversed. But in this case, the original case that we mentioned, Reuven, who's the one who's living in the house, is already living in the house. And therefore, the machloket is who has the burden of proof. Next case, a person says, again, "Why are you living in my house?" And Shimon says, "You sold it to me." Reuven says, "I was actually away for 3 years, so I couldn't protest you living in my house." Remember, we said, if the person was living in the house for 3 years or on the field for 3 years, and the owner didn't make a claim within those 3 years, so then he can have it. So, but here, Reuven says, "I was away for 3 years. I had no idea that you were living in my house." So Shimon says, "I actually have witnesses that say that you came back to town every year for 30 days. So Reuven says, "Well, yes, I came to town once a year, but those days I was busy in the market and I didn't know that you were living in my house." So the Gemara says that Reuven has the valid claim, meaning the owner has the valid claim, and therefore the occupant, even though he was there for 3 years, needs to leave the house and give it back to the original owner. Next case, Reuven says, "Why are you on my land?" Shimon says, "I bought it from Levi," meaning I bought it from a third party. who said that he bought it from you, right? So since Shimon, who's on the property now, admitted that the land originally belonged to Ruvain, the original owner, the land actually goes back to the original owner because Shimon can't prove that he's the owner. Again, he doesn't have any document, and he didn't buy it directly from Ruvain. He bought it from a third party. So the Gemara says the land goes back to Ruvain. However, Shimon can now go to Levi and say, give me back my money because you sold me the wrong thing or you weren't allowed to sell it. Next case, Reuven says, why are you on my land? Shimon says, I bought it from Levi, again, a third party, and I've been on this land for 3 years. So Reuven says, wait a minute, Levi, the third guy, he stole the land from me. So Shimon says, listen, I actually have witnesses that you told me to buy this land. So Reuven says, the original owner, he says, yeah, I told you to buy the land so that I can get it back from you. I couldn't get it back from Levi. Maybe he was too difficult a person or he was too strong, but you're easier. So I figured I'll get you to buy it and then I'll be able to get it back from you. So the Gemara says that Reuven's claim is valid and the field goes back to the original owner, to Reuven. Again, next case, Reuven says, why are you on my field? Shimon says, I bought it from Levi. Again, the third guy. I guess he's been doing a lot of shady deals, this Levi, right? Levi, and then again, Reuven says, Levi stole it from me. So Shimon says, I have witnesses that you tried to buy it from me last night, and now you're saying you own it? How could that be, right? You tried to buy it from me. So Reuben says again, I figured it would be easier to buy it than to sue you, but you didn't buy it, you didn't sell it to me, so now I'm going to sue you. Again, the Gemara says Reuven's claim is valid and it goes back to the original owner. Next case, the same case, right? Reuven says, what are you doing on my land? Shimon says, I bought it from Levi and I bought it again. I was on the land for 3 years. Reuven says, I actually have a document that says that I bought it from Levi 4 years ago. Right? So again, Shimon says, I bought it 3 years ago. Reuven says, I bought it from him 4 years ago. So Shimon says, well, right, when I said that I was here for 3 years, I didn't mean I was only here for 3 years. I've actually been here for many years. So the Gemara says that Shimon's claim is valid and he gets to keep the field. Now, this only counts if he was there for 7 years, right? Because again, he had to have been there 3 years before the new claim, and the new claim is 4 years old. So he needs to have been there 3 years, and then this claim, right, of 4 years. But if not, then it's not valid. And if you only had it for 2 years before those 4 years, then it would not be valid. Okay, Daf 31. Let's say 2 people are fighting over a field and each one says it belonged to their family, right? This was my forefather's land. And he says it was my forefather's land. Now, Reuven has witnesses that it belonged to his family. Shimon has witnesses that he was there for 3 years. So now the question is, which one works, right? Which one is stronger? So the Gemara uses the concept. We have had this before. The concept is malo lishaker, right? Why should he lie, right? What does that mean, right? Why would he lie? Meaning, when right, the person Shimon could have said, I bought it from you, or right, meaning if he had a better lie, that we would have believed him more, and he didn't use it. Therefore, we believe his claim that he was there for 3 years. And because he was there for 3 years and Reuven didn't say anything in those 3 years, he gets to keep the land. Or another opinion is no. If there are witnesses that Reuven's family owned it previously, that trumps the not good lie of Shimon. And therefore, Reuven actually gets the land and not Shimon. Okay, let's say then Shimon then said, really, you know what, really your family owned it. But then I bought it from you. And I felt so secure that it was as if my family owned it. But it's not true, right? So he said, therefore, I said my family owned it, but really I meant that I bought it from you. So the Gemara says this is actually a machloket, right? Because the issue is what happens if a person basically changes their story. So the Gemara says, right, one opinion is that you're allowed to reinterpret what you originally meant, right? When I said X, I really meant Y, right? So maybe that's valid and you're allowed to reinterpret what you were saying, or no, you can't, you can't retract something you said, and you said X and that was disproven. So then that's the end of the claim. Okay. If he said it was my family's and it was never yours, so then you can't reinterpret that, right? Once you say, oh, it was never yours, so then you can't change your mind. That means you're just changing your testimony, which is, or whatever, your claim, and you're not allowed to do that. Okay. Let's say a person, right, makes a claim and then he leaves the court and then he comes in and he makes a new claim. So we say, the Gemara says, we don't believe that person, right? Maybe he had help from someone else, right? Maybe someone else outside said, oh, you should have said this, it would have been better, right? So once you leave, you're not allowed to change your statement. But if you're still in court and you never left, maybe you can reinterpret, right, or explain what you meant, and maybe that would be acceptable. So the law is that we do believe the second statement as long as it just clarifies the first statement, right? But you can't say it was red and then say, really, I meant yellow, right? That's not reinterpreting, that's changing your mind, and that doesn't work. Okay, another case. Reuven brings witnesses that the field belongs to his family and he was there for 3 years. Shimon brings witnesses that he was there for 3 years. So, right, which one wins? So the land goes to Reuven because he has witnesses and because he has witnesses that his family owns it. And since they both have a chazaka, then that gets canceled out, right? So again, we're left with the witnesses that it belonged to his family, and therefore you believe him about that part. The Gemara says, wait a minute, they can't each have been there for 3 years, right? That means one of them is lying, and therefore if one of them is lying, you have to throw out all the testimony, right? Because they both couldn't have been there for 3 years, and therefore the witnesses must be lying, and therefore you cancel out the entire testimony. So now we're going to talk about witnesses, right? So let's say you have 2 sets of witnesses that contradict each other. Even though you know that one of the sets is lying, we don't know which one, and therefore they would still be valid witnesses on a different case because we don't know who is lying and who is telling the truth. So back to our case, right? We know that the witnesses are lying about something. So if Shimon finds witnesses that it belonged to his family, then we go back to court, and now it's even with Reuven, and we aren't concerned about disgracing the court. Here we have a concept in Aramaic, the Gemara calls it ziluta de dina. And we're going to discuss this now. are we concerned that the court is going to look weak, right? We know that we always want the courts to look strong, but what happens if the court makes a decision and then new testimony comes and they change their minds and then they change their minds again, right? That doesn't look very strong. And one could say that it's a disgrace of the court if they have to keep changing their verdict. So the question is, are we concerned about this or not? So here the Gemara says we're not concerned. If there's new evidence, you go back to court and you fix whatever the issue is. So now the Gemara gives a few cases of, are we concerned about the integrity? I shouldn't say the integrity of are we concerned about the way it looks on the outside? Meaning, obviously, the court is doing what's right and just. The question is, will people think poorly of the court if they keep changing their minds? So the Gemara brings a case, we actually saw it in a while ago, actually, speaking about a woman where there were witnesses that say that her husband died. Can she get remarried? And we had the case where, one set of witnesses comes and then another set. So, right, if a woman got remarried after a set of witnesses came and said her husband died, and then another set of witnesses come and they say that he's alive, so then she needs to leave her husband because they made a mistake. But if she got married before the second set came, she doesn't need to leave him. And the Gemara says maybe this is because of ziluta, right? Again, we don't want to disgrace the court. The court already let her get married, and therefore she can stay married. Right, so we don't want the court to have to reverse their decision. The Gemara then says it's a machluket if we are concerned for this or not. Again, in that case, we're not sure because it's two witnesses against another two sets of witnesses. Obviously, if we know for sure, so then that's a different story. But here, because we're not sure, the court is not going to reverse the original verdict. Another case where we don't raise a person, let's say we're not sure if a person is a priest or not. They move into the neighborhood and we're not sure. So you don't kind of recognize them as a Kohen based on one witness, right? Because one witness isn't enough. And this is only if somebody is challenging their status. Right. Again, if someone moves into the neighborhood and he says, oh, my name is David Cohen, I'm a Cohen, so great, you're a Cohen. But if someone comes and says, oh, wait a minute, I know that David Cohen and his mother was really, or he's not a valid Cohen for whatever reason, now we have an issue. We have to look into it. So if someone challenges him, we don't affirm that he's a Kohen based on one witness. But if no one is challenging him, then one witness is enough. Or maybe it's a machluket if one person challenges him versus two people challenging him. Okay, Daf 32, the case of a person who was confirmed as a Kohen, and then the court demoted him because two witnesses came and said that his parents weren't married in the appropriate way, right? Maybe his mother was a chaluta, right? His father wasn't allowed to marry her. And then new witnesses come and then they promote him again, and then they demote him again, right? Again, it goes back and forth. The Gemara says we don't raise him up again because of ziluta. It's not nice to the court. You keep going back and forth and it's really irresponsible. Or maybe you do, based on the current testimony, you do what you need to do. Or, right, everyone agrees that we're not concerned for disgracing the court, but they argue if you can combine two single testimonies into one testimony. Okay, let's go back to our Reuven and Shimon cases. So now we have a new case. Shimon shows Reuven that he has a document that Reuven sold the field to him, right? So he has this document. Reuven says it's actually a forged document. This is not real. So Shimon says, he whispers to the judge that really it is a fake document, but it's only because he had a real document, but he lost it. So he figured he would forge this document, but really he owns it. So the judge rules, again, the concept of malo lishaker, right? He didn't have to say anything. He could have just said, this is the real document, and it looked real. But the fact that he admits that it was forged, we say it must be that not only was it forged, but that he really did have as the sale document. And therefore we believe Shimon, and he gets to keep the land. Rav Yosef says that we don't believe him, and therefore Reuven gets the land. The same case, but with a loan, meaning you owe me money, and then he says, no, I don't, I have this document, and he says, really, it's a forgery. So with the land, the law is that the land stays with Shimon, with the occupant. But with a loan, the money stays where it is, which is with the borrower, and he does not have to pay back the loan. Let's say a guarantor tells the borrower that he paid for his loan, and he has the document of the loan, and he wants to collect the money. So the borrower says, wait a minute, I already paid you back. So again, the money stays with the borrower. The money stays where it was. Okay, daf 33. There's a rumor that a certain person, Rava Bar Sharshum, took fields of orphans. Now that sounds really terrible. So he explains that really the father of the orphans, he owed him money, and he gave him the field as the collateral. Remember, we have seen this in the last Masachet, where the field becomes collateral for the loan, and you can eat from the field, and then you give back the field. So he says, but not only that, but he also owed him money that was not connected to the field. So what did he do? He decided, oh, I'll keep the land for an extra year, right? And I'll eat the amount of food to pay back not only the first loan, but also the second loan, right? Even though it wasn't connected to the field, because he figured he wouldn't be able to get the money from the orphans, right? So he wanted to be believed that it was the only way he could get the money from the orphans. So Abaye said that he has to return the field, and he can bring the orphans to court when they grow up. But in the meantime, he is not allowed to eat from those fields, and he has to return it. Okay, next case. Two people are arguing who the closest relative is to the deceased, right? A person dies, he leaves an estate, and two people are arguing over who inherits the estate. And one grabs, here it was like a tree. So one of them grabs the tree. After a few years, he admits that really the other person was the closest relative. So he returns the tree, right? He says sorry, but the other person can't now demand back pay. He can't say, right, all the fruit that you ate for the past few years, give me back, because again, he gave it to him as a gift. He didn't have to give it to him. Therefore, he can't demand any other money. Or maybe he can demand it because he admitted that he lied. And since he admitted that he lied, he is able to claim that he wants back pay. Okay, next case. Okay, Reuven has witnesses that his family owns the field, and Shimon has witnesses that he's been on the field, right? He's been working it for 3 years. So again, Rav Chisda says, malo lishaker. Again, why does he have to lie about Shimon? Meaning, Shimon could have said that he bought the land, but he says that I've been on the land for 3 years, and therefore we believe him that he was on the land for 3 years, and therefore he gets to keep the land. Rava and Abaye say, no, we don't use this case of he could, why should he lie? Because there are witnesses, and therefore the land goes to Reuven to say that that he originally owned the land, and therefore he gets to keep the land. Okay, let's say Shimon only brings witnesses that he was there for 2 years, so then he has to return the field to Reuven, and he has to pay for all the produce that he ate because he wasn't allowed to be there. But if Shimon only claimed to have the right to the produce, right, he says, oh, Reuven let me pick all the apples here. Right, not that he bought the field, but that he bought the apples. So then we would believe him. And this is because people aren't brazen enough to say, oh, he let me pick all the apples, right? And if you're going in the morning to pick all the apples, we assume that you have the right to be there, and he must be telling the truth. And therefore he gets to keep it. For the field, right, you can demand to see the document, right? Show me that you have that you bought the document, that you bought this field. But when you buy produce, there's usually no document, right? It's a sale, right? I let you harvest my apples. There's usually no contract, and therefore you don't have to produce a contract for that. Next case, Shimon brings one witness that he was on the land for 3 years. But it's not enough because one witness is not enough. So he has to give back the land, but he does not have to pay back for all the fruit that he ate. Daf 34, a person grabbed, so the Gemara says maybe this is similar to the following case, where a person grabbed a piece of silver from another person, and he brings one witness to testify that the person grabbed it away from him. Right? The grabber says, actually, it was mine first, and he stole it from me, so then I took it back. Right? So if we don't have witnesses that it was his first, and he can't swear that it was his first because the fact that he grabs it makes him a thief, and we don't trust, right, for him to swear. So therefore, he can't swear that it was his. Therefore, in this case, the grabber has to give it back to the original guy because there's no proof that it was his in the first place. So the Gemara says maybe that's the same thing with our field case, right? Again, there's one witness that he was there for 3 years. Therefore, maybe he should have to pay back for all the produce. But the Gemara says, wait a minute, it's not the same case because the witness in the silver case is, the witness in the field case is supporting the person who's on the occupant of the property. But in the silver case, the witness is coming against the person who grabbed the silver. And therefore, it's 2 different cases. In the silver case, he has to give it back. But in the field case, he does not have to pay for the produce. He does have to return the field, but he does not have to return the produce. But if he has one witness that he was only there for 2 years, then he does have to pay for the produce. Okay, another case, we now have a boat, and 2 people were fighting over the boat. It's tied to in the pier. So one of the guys goes to court and he says, do me a favor, can you impound, right? Can the court seize the boat so that it gives me time to find witnesses to prove that the boat is mine? So now we have a machloket if the court is allowed to seize the boat. What's the issue? they could seize the boat for a limited time, or maybe no, they shouldn't, because in order to give it back, when they give it back, they would have to give it back to the actual owner. And since we don't know who the owner is, it's better that they don't seize it in the first place. Okay, so here we have a new concept. The concept in the Gemara is called kol de'alim gvar. And those words mean whoever is stronger, right? Alim, like in modern Hebrew, alimut means like violence, but we'll define it in a second. But the words mean, right? Whoever is stronger wins. Now, the Gemara is going to show it could mean like physically stronger, right? Whoever, grabs the boat first, he wins. Or it could also mean whoever has the stronger case, right? Whoever has the stronger legal claim is the winner, even though it's not 100% sure who owns it. So now we're going to see cases of kol de'alim gvar, and when it works and when it doesn't work. So the Gemara says that really the court should not seize the boat, but if they do, they're not allowed to release it till they know who the owner is, meaning there has to be proof that someone is the owner. And if you don't have that proof, they're not allowed to release the boat. Another case, two people are fighting over a field. So here the court says, kol de'alim gvar, right? Whoever, basically the court is saying, we're not getting involved because there's no proof either way. Whoever takes it, right? Also, the idea is, or I guess the legal theory behind this concept is whoever is the rightful owner is going to fight the hardest. That's the assumption. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, how come in this case with the field, the court says, you guys fight it out? But in a case where two people come to court and each one has a document saying that they bought the land on the same day, right? Or they got it as a gift on the same day. So in that case, Daf 35, the Gemara tells us, right there, it's actually a machloket. Rav says you actually split the land because we don't know who the person, right? Again, Reuven gave it to Shimon at 10 o'clock in the morning, and then he gave it to Levi at 12 o'clock in the afternoon. So we don't know, right? Did he mean the first person or the second person? And I guess he's not around anymore. So Rav says we split it. Shmuel says it's up to the court, right? The court has to investigate and the court decides who gets it. But neither one of them says, let them fight it out. So how come in the other case, we say, let them fight it out? So the Gemara says, because in the case with the two documents, we really don't know whose it really is because again, we can't ask the person, so we don't really know. Therefore, the court gets involved. But in the first case, again, even though nobody can prove it, someone will eventually find a witness to show that it was theirs or that they bought it. And the assumption is they'll eventually figure it out. And therefore, the court doesn't get involved and they'll just figure it out on their own and it'll go to the rightful owner. Okay, another case. A person exchanges, we actually have this case, I think in Bava Metzia, a person exchanges a donkey for a cow. And so the person has the cow, when he takes the cow, the other person buys his, when he takes the donkey, the other person acquires the cow, but the cow isn't there. When they get to the cow had given birth. So now they argue when it gave birth, right? If it gave birth before the sale, so then the original owner keeps the baby. If it gave birth after the sale, so then the new owner owns it. So the Gemara says again, here they split the value. Again, the court gets involved. So now the Gemara asks again, how come we don't say kol da'alim gvar, right? Whoever fights. So the Gemara says again, because each one has a claim, therefore the court is going to get involved. But with the field, it only really belongs to one of them. Therefore, let them fight it out. And excuse me. And whoever gets it, gets it. If a third person comes and takes the field, so then he can keep it even if he doesn't have any proof of ownership, because really it doesn't belong to anyone because we don't know who it belongs to, and therefore it's not seen as stealing because we don't know who it belongs to. Or another opinion is no, we take it away from him because again, it's obviously not his, and we have to figure out who it belongs to. Okay, let's say the original, okay, back to like our regular cases of Reuven and Shimon, the original owner and the person who's on the land now. If the original owner is seen helping the occupant on the land during those 3 years, it proves that he sold the land and therefore he has a chazaka. But if he has an explanation, like I just sold him the fruits and I didn't sell him the land, so then we believe the owner over the occupant. And this is only if he explains it within the first 3 years, but after 3 years, we don't believe him. Okay, let's say a person sold the rights to the fruit for 5 years. So he needs to make sure that he's seen on the land during that time. Otherwise, the person can claim that he sold him the land, right? So you have to be very careful. The owner needs to show that he still owns the land. So he has to make sure that he goes to the land during those 5 years, or at least 3 years. With a non-Jew, there's no issue of a chazaka. It's only a document. Therefore, if a non-Jew sold Jewish land to another Jew, the only way to prove that you bought it is with a document and not chazaka. But a person is believed to say that the non-Jew bought the land from the Jew, or maybe he can only say that he was bought in front of him. Okay, daf 36, the last daf for today. We believe a person to say that he has the rights to cut down someone's dates if he's walking around with all of the gear, right? Again, remember we said a person is not brazen enough to walk in, with a ladder and a chainsaw and ropes, right, to go onto someone else's property. We assume that if he says he has the rights to be there, we assume that he has the rights to be there. If a person occupies an area right outside of someone's field, apparently in those days when you had a field, and if let's say it was near like wild area, right? Let's say like a forest or something. So a person would leave a little bit of their land, and maybe like throw some seeds there so that the wild animals would eat from there and not go into their own field. So if a person occupies that little area, that's not seen as chazaka, because again, the owner doesn't plant that area, right? That's seen as like either no man's land, or that's not enough of a chazaka for the field. If an occupant was in the field for 3 years, but it was the 3 years of orla. If you remember, orla is the first 3 years of a fruit tree. You are not allowed to eat those fruits; they're forbidden. So if the person was on the property for those 3 years, that's not called chazaka, because the owner would say, who cares that you were on the land? I couldn't eat the fruit anyway, so that's why I didn't say anything. Or if it was shmita, or if it's kilayim, right? If there's 2 species planted there, because again, the owner doesn't feel the need to protest land that he wasn't going to use anyway. If the person, again, the occupant, if he cut down produce before it was ripe for 3 years, that's also not a chazaka, because again, you coming before it's ripe is not the normal way to harvest things. However, right, that's usually like animal feed, but it's not normal farming, and therefore it doesn't create a chazaka. So too, if it's a bad crop, that's also not a chazaka. Again, the owner doesn't feel the need to protest if it's like a bad crop because he doesn't want the crop anyway. The Gemara says that the Reish Galuta was the ruler of the Jewish people in Bavel, in the diaspora. So the Reish Galuta, either the person or the household, they're not allowed to make a chazaka in someone else's field, or vice versa. You're not allowed to make a chazaka in their field, again, because they're too powerful. And therefore, if you're involved with the Reish Galuta, like in terms of any sort of business dealing, you need to have a document that you bought it, and it's not enough that you were working the land, or if they were working the land. Okay, now the Gemara says, can you make a chazaka on owning a slave? Again, in the time of the Mishnah, it seems that people did own slaves. So the question is, can you say, oh, he's been working for me for 3 years. It proves that I own him. Now, we're going to learn a concept. We didn't learn it yet, but we're going to learn a concept that you can't make a chazaka on like an animal that goes in a pen. Because again, you could just pick up, let's say you could pick up a sheep and move it to another pen. You could just say, oh, it's mine. That it's not enough that you have possession of those animals. Maybe the same thing with a slave. Again, a slave can pick up and walk away from you anytime. But if you can prove that the slave was with you for 3 years, so then there is a chazaka. And it proves that he is yours if he's been working with you for 3 years. Let's say a person took goats as a security that he was owed money. He's believed to say that he's owed money because he could have said that he owns the goat, but instead he said it was security. And even though there are these penned animals, as I said before, it seems that in Nahardea, goats were always supervised. And therefore, if he has the goat, it means that he has rights to that goat. Okay, back to establishing a chazaka. We have a machloket. If the person plowed the field, does that count as a chazaka? Again, we were talking about harvesting the field, definitely planting. The question is plowing showing enough of like I own the field? Or maybe everyone agrees that plowing the field isn't enough for chazaka. But you need, right, a lot of the crop to grow to count as a chazaka. Therefore, you need, and we had seen this last week, you need to have, right, 3 months of 1 year to have plowed and harvested, and then a second year, and then a third year. Also, by the way, just for my mother-in-law, in Aramaic, nira means to plow, right? The plowed field. So your name Nira appears on Daf 36 if you're interested, but that's in Aramaic. And the last idea for today is if 2 out of the 3 years he only plowed the field, so we say that actually is, that can make a chazaka, because it's actually good for the field to plow. It aerates the field, and therefore it's good. And in general, a person's not going to let a stranger plow his field. Or another opinion, of course, is no, the owner's like, great, you want to plow my field and I'm not paying you? Okay, great, so plow my field. And it doesn't necessarily prove that you own the field. So the Gemara concludes that everyone agrees that plowing does make a chazaka, or not everyone agrees. Some of them argue. And You also need, let's say if you have trees, then it's enough to harvest 3 crops. It doesn't necessarily have to be over 3 years. So with that, we actually finish our dapim for the week. The truth is that thanks to the Rashbam, who we learned about last week, he is definitely more prolific, and therefore the dapim are much shorter. So that gives us some time for some questions. So I'm going to stop the recording. So just want to wish everyone Shabbat Shalom. Be'ezrat Hashem, next week will be regular on Wednesday night. And wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom.